Hi, everyone, and welcome to today's episode. We're going to be talking about Welcome to the Honey Bee and Bee by Melody Carlson. So, this one is a contemporary fiction novel that has romantic elements. It's a standalone story and it fits within the Christian fiction genre. And I'll do my usual disclaimer and say thank you to the publisher for giving me an advanced reader copy of this one, and that all the opinions that I express in this episode are completely my own. Now, why did I want to read this one? Well, I've loved reading the previous books I've read by Melody Carlson. She's so good at writing contemporary fiction that has really, it has romance in it, but it's not a complete romance plot in the way that many romance readers would expect. But I love the way that the romance really adds so much oomph and flavour to her contemporary fiction stories. And a couple that I'll mention is one I've really enjoyed is Just for the Summer. That was a summer job swap story where it was a hospitality managers. We've got a city hotel manager in a boutique hotel in Seattle who swaps jobs with a manager of a family-owned fishing lodge in Idaho, and that was a really fun story. And I also liked reading Second Time Around, which was set on the Oregon coast. So you can find my book recommendations at my blog, at my website, which is at narelleatkins.com, and there'll be a link in the show notes. So let's talk about the book. Welcome to the Honey Bee and Bee by Melody Carlson is set in a small town in Oregon in a farming community that I think would be probably towards the Portland area, sort of in the northern part of Oregon. And this one has women's fiction issues in the story, so it could be read by men quite easily. That's why I won't call it women's fiction, because I don't want men to think that they shouldn't be reading it, that it's all about women, because I think this book could be equally enjoyed by both men and women. And it has family drama with the three generations of the one family that end up on the farm together. And the big issue in this one is it deals with dementia, in particular early onset dementia, which is, I think it's frontal temporal dementia. So it's known as FTD. So if you hear me referring to FTD during this episode, I'm talking about the early onset dementia that the grandfather in the story is diagnosed with and how that's impacting the family. And so it's in a small town, we're in a farming community, and the farm, they do beekeeping, and that's a big part of the story as well. So let's talk about the first line, and this is what it is. Honey McCary suppressed the urge to firmly lower the cast iron skillet directly onto her husband's slightly balding noggin. Now, that one is an interesting first line, and I think it's really important to know genre. If that was the first line of a suspense novel, we'd be in a completely different headspace. But in this situation, what we're actually hearing is Honey, who's one of our main characters, what's really going on in her head at the start of the story, and she's very frustrated about a whole lot of stuff. So she's in her late 60s. She's a recently retired school teacher. And she'd originally planned for her retirement to travel and do all the things that most new retirees do when they finally escape the dirge of the 9 to 5 or the Monday to Friday career that they've been doing for decades. But in reality, CT was diagnosed, that's her husband, 18 months earlier before the story starts, with FTD. And she's really his full-time carer and doesn't leave the farm a lot because CT does need to be supervised. And over time, the care needs that he has are growing as well. And so at the start of the story, she's frustrated, she's burnt out, she's exhausted, and that's really where her headspace is. And it's very clearly shown by the first line. And her daughter, Jewel, decides that she's going to come and stay and help her mum. And so Honey is just relieved that her daughter's going to be staying with her granddaughter as well. And she's also apprehensive because Jewel is quite impulsive and quite strong-willed, and she's not quite sure how all of them, the four of them, will actually go living under the same roof together. So let's talk about Jewel. So she's a single mum with 13-year-old Cooper, her daughter. Her ex-husband, she was marriage number 4 or 5, and it didn't work out, which and we learn this in Honey's point of view, and Honey's not particularly surprised that Jewel has ended up being a single mother, but she absolutely adores her granddaughter Cooper. And Jewel is an artist and she owns an art gallery in San Jose in California. She survived COVID and all the issues that went along with that, and the art gallery has done well. And Honey is just really surprised when Jewel wants to move to the farm. And what she doesn't know is that Jewel is really concerned about her daughter's friend group. So her daughter's nearly 14. She's got friends at school that Jewel doesn't think are a good influence on her. And she's really thinking it would be a good thing to remove her daughter from this friend group that could be a problem, and also help her mother with her dad at the same time. And knowing her dad's diagnosis, she's really concerned that she doesn't have much time left to see him and therefore wants to go and live with him and make the most of the time that he does have left when he remembers her. So she decides to pack up her life in San Jose. She sells her condo, sells the art gallery, packs up Cooper, who is not very happy about this. There's a few slam doors that happen during some of the conversations with her mother. So we've got a few temperamental things going on there. But they ultimately pack up and move to the farm. And that's where we start. And so CT is in his late 60s, the same as Honey. And they've been married for years and really had a very happy, solid marriage. And his diagnosis with the dementia has just totally changed their world, changed their relationship. He's now very forgetful and he can forget something that he was told 5 minutes ago. He's also struggling with hearing loss, so he mishears what's being said to him, particularly if he doesn't have his hearing aids in, which is quite common. And then in the first chapter, you'll learn that Honey's running around trying to find what he actually did with his hearing aids. And she calls him the lone rearranger because he just doesn't have there's no permanent home for anything anymore in the way he's thinking, and he will rearrange things and do things, and then it takes a bit of time to sort of work out exactly where he has moved things and to get things back into order. And so that's a constant challenge that Honey has. So there's quite a few problems that come up in this story, and really the issue with CT's dementia, which is handled so beautifully and so sensitively in the story, with such a light touch as well. There's a bit of humour that comes up out of certain situations that happen, and it's really, really hard. And I had no idea until I actually sat down and read this book what a difficult journey that the family are on when they're caring for someone in the home who is struggling with dementia and all the physical issues that go along with that. It's not just the memory loss, there's also with the FTD, there's the cognitive and motor skills decline as well that goes with it. And it really impacts the whole family. And so when Jewel and Cooper arrive, I don't think they quite knew what to expect. And then when they got there, I think Jewel in particular realized that her mother really did desperately need her, even though she didn't necessarily articulate that, because Honey's always been very capable and very strong, and she's now under pressure in this situation with CT and how his health is declining. So we've got Jewel who wants to convert the farmhouse into a B&B and wants to find accommodation on the farm for her parents at single level because CT's having trouble negotiating the stairs. CT also has a lot of difficulty in social situations. So he sold most of the farmland where they're on to their neighbours, but he can't actually remember that he did that. So he actually thinks that the neighbours stole his land, and he has an issue with one of the neighbours, and there's just a multitude of problems that happen that really make it reluctant for Honey to take CT out into social situations because they're very unpredictable and she's not quite sure what's going to happen and how people will handle it. And I mean, really, in this one, we see just what a big sacrifice the carers are making when they are basically giving up their lives, they're giving up their independence in a lot of cases. And people on the outside don't necessarily see what's really going on inside the house. And that to me was quite eye-opening. And the pressure that is put on a marriage relationship when it's your spouse that is struggling with dementia was heartbreaking to read. It was eye-opening. It was, I don't know quite how to explain what the reading experience is like. And I think it probably depends on your background and where you're coming from as to what your experience will be. But for me, it was just incredibly eye-opening, and I felt a lot of empathy for the characters. Now, with the faith element in this one, I'd refer to it as having relevant faith elements. We have characters who are really crying out to God at different times because of the craziness of what's going on with the family and CT's health issues. They're basically reaching out to God and questioning why this is happening and how they're going to cope, and worried and scared about what the future is going to look like and what's going to happen. So there's a lot of faith issues that come up in this story. And the big question often is why? Why does God allow these things to happen? And why are they dealing with a loved one with a disease that is just really, really tough? So there was just so many things I loved about this book. I really loved the beekeeping aspects. So they make their own honey on the farm, and Jewel and Honey aren't particularly fussed on the bees. They're CT's bees, and that's been his passion for a long time. And it's his granddaughter Cooper that really likes the bees. So I loved seeing how Cooper and CT managed the beekeeping situation and helped each other, and that was really cool to see in the story. And the FTD dementia issue, it's not sugar coated. We see the raw emotion on the page. We see the reality of what's actually going on in their household. And it really is a roller coaster journey where particularly Jewel and Honey, they just don't know what's going to happen next. They just don't know what to expect. And that living with that stress is really, really tough. And at the same time, it also strengthened the family relationships. So Cooper and Jewel and Honey really needed to work together and help each other to manage the very difficult situation that they were dealing with. And being in a small town and a farming community with neighbours, we also see the community and the neighbours helping out with different things as well, and really caring about what was going on. And at times, quite, I can't quite, how do I say this? At times, I think they were a bit shocked about how all this stuff is happening under their nose, and that Honey's under quite a lot of pressure with what's going on with CT, and they just weren't aware of what was going on as well. But they very much wanted to help as much as they can in terms of her being able to manage the situation. So, my favorite book quote is this one. I mean, sometimes we just have to let some things go and admit we're human and make mistakes. And this quote really sums up Honey and Jewel in terms of they're both very competent, capable women who are used to being able to manage their own lives quite successfully. And now they are dealing with CT, who just, he's the fly in the ointment. He's the person who they can't predict necessarily how he's going to handle something. And so things that should be easy and straightforward become incredibly difficult. And I really loved how we got to see the light-hearted aspects of that, where Honey in particular and Jewel and Cooper, they could just look at the funny side, because you either laugh or cry in these situations. And the hilarious moments that come from some of the things that happen with CT, I mean, it really did bring a smile to my face to read it. And I just loved particularly Honey's attitude, because she was dealing with some really tough stuff, yet she could still see the funny side to some of the circumstances and some of the situations that happen, and still not take herself too seriously, and knowing that she's at risk of depression and all those other things, she was able to also try and focus on the bright side, and sort of have an inspiring and hopeful view of the world, rather than we're all doomed and everyone's going to die and it's going to be terrible. So in terms of trigger warnings for this story, I don't I don't think this is a story that would probably trigger anyone with any major issues, except if you are in a situation where you're caring for a loved one, and if you're finding it really tough and really difficult, then the humor might fall flat for you, depending on where your headspace is. So if you're in a headspace where seeing the funny side of the dementia journey is not something that would be helpful to you, then I'd recommend putting this book aside and reading it later. But I did enjoy how the story really was uplifting and hopeful rather than depressing and horrible, because the circumstances were really, really tough, and the characters had to choose to be hopeful and choose to believe that God was looking after them and that there was a better and brighter end to the story, that things just weren't going to keep going downhill and be miserable. So, in terms of my summary for this one, I would recommend this book to readers who like charming small town family drama. And I tell you, there's a lot of family drama in this one. If you like issues-based fiction that you often see with women's fiction, then you'll love this one, particularly if you're interested in learning about early onset dementia and how that impacts the family and friends and everyone around the person who's struggling with the dementia. And it's just handled with such sensitivity and grace. And I just love the way Melody wrote it. It was very much from the heart. And I really appreciated the honesty that came through in the story as well. And if you're looking at reading something where there's a marriage under a lot of pressure, then you'll see Honey and CT's marriage and the strain that his diagnosis is putting on, and really how Honey, her love for him is so sacrificial in so many ways because she is giving up so much of herself to care for him in the home. And I really appreciated seeing her journey with that and seeing it written so beautifully and with so much care as well. And you'll like this one if you enjoy sitcoms and situational comedy, as I call it, where things happen that are funny, then CT will provide you with lots of situational humor that you will laugh at, because there are some pretty crazy, funny things that happen in this story that will put a smile on your face and maybe a little giggle will come out of your mouth as well. And I think there are some situations for the characters where, particularly Honey, would get to the point where you either laugh or you cry or you do both because it's just so insane what's going on. And you'll like this one if you enjoy contemporary fiction that has romantic elements. So the romance in the story is very understated. It's not front and center at all. And it very much balances out a lot of the heavier stuff that's happening in the story as well. So I really appreciate how the romance elements played out in the story, and I loved how we have relevant faith elements, and the characters really, when they're in hard situations and really feeling the pressure of the family circumstances and what's going on, that they do turn to God and pray and ask him for help. And I really love that about the story. Thanks for joining me today. Does Welcome to the Honey B&B sound like a book that you'd like to read? Or have you already read it? You can let me know. If you're listening on the podcast, you can send me a text via a link in the show notes. If you're watching on YouTube, you can like the episode and leave a comment at YouTube. You can also email me via the contact form at my website, which is narelleatkins.com. If you've enjoyed listening to this episode, please share the link with a friend who you think would enjoy reading Melody's book and who likes reading contemporary fiction. The links that I've mentioned in the episode will be in the show notes. Thanks again for tuning in, and see you next time.